I love Mexican lagers. They're light, they're crisp, they're refreshing and easy drinking, but weirdly enough, we actually haven't made one on the channel yet. So today, our challenge is to take the likes of a Corona, a Sol, or a Modelo and see if we can brew a better Mexican lager than the big Mexican breweries. So, vamos cerveceros. Hoy estamos haciendo una cerveza mexicana. Comencemos. Welcome back, brewers and beer lovers, to Flying Wombat TV, and today is going to be a very fun day because this is part one of our mini-series Battle of the Lagers. Two of the most requested beers on our channel are Japanese and Mexican lagers, so today we are going to do both. So starting with the Mexican lager, we're going to get brewing and then we're going to see which beer comes out on top. Now, for the grain bill for this Mexican lager, it's really simple, but there's one very important factor. Corn. It's got the juice. It's the greatest everything. We're only a year late to that meme. But we are using flaked corn. So on top of this is rice hulls, and that's because when you use a lot of clumpy kind of grains, I don't know if flaked corn is going to be one of them, but I'm going to be better safe than sorry. It helps to just let all the water drain through properly and you don't get a stuck sparge. But underneath there is flaked corn. None of this stuff needs to go through the grain mill because the rest of the grain bill is just 80% Pilsner malt. Just straight up. That's all we need for this beer. It's very simple because we want it to be very light, very fermentable, and very smashable. Now, let's get started. Let's start mashing in, shall we? All right, now that we've crushed up all of our Pilsner malt, we can mix in all the corn and the rice hulls. I like to do this before we add water just to make sure that all the grains are actually evenly distributed. Not really that necessary, but it's just something that I've always done. So, I don't know, do it if you want, I guess. All right, so what I'm gonna do actually, I'm gonna turn the heating elements off. I just need to remember afterwards this time to actually turn them back on. If you've seen our Code Brown video, I forgot to check the heating afterwards and then just botched the brew day. So, remind me, guys, remind me to turn them back on once we finish mashing in. But here we go. All right. So this one's not a particularly heavy grain bill. I think, what was the total? I guess it will show up on screen, but I think from memory, this was only about like 4 kilos or close enough to that. So there's really not a lot in here because it's meant to be quite light bodied. It's not meant to have a whole bunch of grain presence. There's meant to be a touch of that corn-like sweetness, but aside from that, it's meant to just be very light, very drinkable, and it's kind of not even a hop-forward beer, it's not a grain-forward beer, it's just, it shines by being delicate and balanced. I think that's the best way to describe a Mexican lager. So, let's blitz this thing. Speaking of corn, actually, there is one thing I thought that was worth pointing out. I have done a Mexican lager before using whole corn, like malted corn, because I was of the opinion corn is corn, right? But very wrong. So malted corn has a heavier body, more heft to it. It's more like, what's the best way to describe it? It's more like an oily popcorn in my mind, rather than like the sweet tamale kind of bread or like tortillas. Like the flaked corn gives you more of like a tortilla aroma and flavor. It's really light bodied and fresh. And malted corn is much denser and heavier. So great for things like making whiskey, like making bourbon, but the flaked corn is your best friend for something like a Mexican lager. It's just a little lighter on the palate. All right, and the last of the grains are going in now. There we go. FYI, if you are new to brewing, the reason why we do bit by bit and don't just dump everything in is because we're trying to avoid grain balls. So that's when you basically get a clump of grain that sticks together, inside's dry, outside's wet, you lose efficiency and you basically just don't get as much beer as you should for the ingredients that you're using. So bit by bit, mix it up and rinse and repeat. All right, there we go, easy done. It stayed. Okay, time to get a lid on this and start recirculating it. So we are going to mash at 64 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. So we're going on the lower side of mash, whatever that is in Fahrenheit. I think that must be like 140 Fahrenheit. I don't know. I guess thumbs up if I'm right. But yes, we want to mash on the lower side because we want this beer to be as fermentable as possible. That's the ultimate goal with this. We want it to be a really, really light body, a really dry finish, because we want this to just be super smashable. Just don't want any heft to it. We want this thing to drink all day long during the middle of summer. Now let's start recirculating that. And away we go. So we will catch you in an hour when it's time to start. Oh, I always forget this part. We are also doing a mash out. So at the end of that hour, the temperature raises up to 77 degrees Celsius for 10 minutes. Always forget that part. That just helps make the wort a little easier to flow out and do your sparging. Now we'll see you at the end of this hour. Now, our mash is finished and it's time to prep our sparge water. So I figured good a time as any to talk about salts. Now, this is a Mexican lager, so we're not going for any particular strong salt water profile. It's really just about letting the other ingredients shine and keeping everything in balance. So it's going to be a pretty soft water profile. In this case, we're going to be running with 22 parts per million of calcium, 5 parts magnesium, 15 sodium, 31 chloride, 30 sulfate, and 57 parts per million bicarbonate, just because that's what's in my water. Now, the important thing here is just keeping that balance between chloride and sulfate. Yes, could maybe go slightly higher on the sulfate to make it a crisper, sharper finish, but I want this one to just be a more delicate, more well-balanced beer. So that's what we're doing. Now, the salts go in. Give it all a big blitz to make sure it's all properly dissolved. And now we can start sparging. All right. And ups-a-daisies. It's got some relative clarity to it, or at least until I disturbed it. It's always a tricky thing working with corn. I've always noticed things like corn really haze up a beer. So, I mean, that's why, you know, lagers, it's nothing but time. I know that in reality, by the time we actually have this in the fermenter and we start lagering and letting it all settle out, that, you know, the clarity on the initial wort is kind of irrelevant, but it does feel a little bit nice inside if you can make a crystal clear wort when you're making a lager. Anyway, doesn't matter. So I am gonna let this drain out and start fly sparging over top. Now the goal here is just be nice and gentle and not disturb the grain bed too much as we slowly pour our hot water over top. Now, if you're new to brewing, the whole purpose behind this is these grains effectively act as a giant sponge. So even once all this sugary liquid called the wort actually drains out through the bottom, it means that we're still gonna have a whole bunch of residual sugars that are trapped in those grains. So by running the hot sparge water over top of those grains, we're basically wringing out the sponge and extracting those extra sugars. So we're increasing our efficiency and making sure that we're getting as much beer out of this as we possibly can. So bit by bit, I'm just going to keep topping this up as it starts to drain out until we're finished with all of our sparge water. At that point, we're going to get to boiling. So I'll see you then. Now we are boiling, so it's time to get our first hop addition in there. This is 19 grams of Spalt Spatzler, which is a noble German hop variety. This is a Mexican lager, but Mexican lagers were largely introduced from the Europeans. Hence, noble hops actually work quite well in a Mexican style lager. So in the 19 grams go, which is 0.67 ounces from memory. And we are going to take a wee little gravity sample while we are at it and find out what we're working with. I want our original gravity to be 1.041, which would give us a, what was it? A 4.5% Mexican lager, I think, from memory. Let's see if we're going to hit that. We are way over that. It's going to be a much boozier lager. So this is actually sitting at 1.044. With the boil off addition, I suspect we finish around 1.047, which might be like a 5.5% lager. Still not that bad, in the realms of what it is to be a Mexican lager, and just means that we've got a touch more booze going on. I just realized we're about to have a boil over. Alrighty, now we will come back in 45 minutes to do our whirl flock. We're not going to film that, it's not worth it. But then in 55 minutes, we'll be back to do our final hop addition with 5 minutes left in the boil. So see you in a sec. Time for our final hop addition. So this is 30 grams now of Spalt Spatzler. So this is our final aroma and flavor addition. 5 minutes left of boil, and then we're going to start bringing this thing down to yeast pitching temperature. So I guess I better get that set up, shall I? Now is as good a time as any to talk about why we're using Spalt Spatzler. So the reason being, Mexican lagers, despite being in America, or in, Central America, you might say, they are largely derived from the Europeans that originally went and settled over there. So a lot of those original beers were brewed with noble hop varieties, hence using a noble hop variety in our Mexican lager. It's got the twist of being Mexican with the corn, but the actual basis of it is still more like a European style lager. So that's why we've used that today. Now, let's start getting this thing ready to cool down. Also worth mentioning to all of you amazing people still watching this video that we do have a Patreon link down below if you want to see more behind the scenes and get more involved with us here at the channel. Now, back to the video. We are now at flame out, so I'm going heat off and I'm going to start pumping this through the counterflow chiller. So cold water up top, hot water coming out the exhaust at the bottom, and then this is all going in reverse. So counterflow chiller. Now, we are going to cool this down to yeast pitching temperature, which I estimate will be at about 20 degrees Celsius. I'll be happy. I'm just noticing that we've got a pump problem. Give me a second. All right, we got there, crisis averted, but yet another lesson. Check out the 10 tips video because I'm not following my own advice. I did not check the pump beforehand. We had a slight clog in there. I had to fix that off camera. And now we're flowing properly. So always check your equipment before you actually get to brew day. Anyway, I'm gonna cool this down to, if I can get below 20 degrees Celsius, I'll be very happy. I'm not sure that I will with groundwater. We'll give it our best shot though. Once we're there, then we'll look at start pitching the yeast. And now we are finally down at yeast pitching temperature, so I can open up the pump here and start transferring over into the fermenter. Beautiful. Also, for full transparency, I have added 2 liters of water into this. Our original gravity was 1.05. It's a little bit on the high side. It was going to give us probably a 5.6% lager, which is a touch high for a Mexican lager. So I've added 2 liters, brought it down to 1.046, which will give us around about a 5.1, maybe 5.2% Mexican lager, which is in the ballpark for the style. So I'm happy enough with that. Once this is finished transferring, we'll add some yeast. Alrighty, it is time for yeast pitching. We have a culture here of S23 SAF lager yeast. Now, this is quite a lot of starter. I'm very aware of that, but what I've done is I've made enough to cover both this one and the Japanese lager because they're both going to be using the same yeast strain. So I'm going to pour about 700 mils-ish into the fermenter, and then the rest I'm going to reserve for the Japanese lager. So, bottoms up. My little yeasty friends, it's time for you to feast. How much is that? Yep, that's about right. Alrighty, now time to close this bad boy up. I will mention now, I think I will probably use a little bit of gelatin in this right when it's finished fermenting completely, and I'm going to transfer into the keg. I'm going to go with about 1 teaspoon of dissolved gelatin, just to help things clarify a little bit and speed things along so I can hurry up and taste these bad boys because I'm very, very curious. Anyway, guys, that is all for this one. I suppose you'll see me in a moment where I show you what this beer ended up looking like. And here it is. So the color is just absolutely spot on. The IBUs are only sitting around 12, which makes it extremely drinkable. It's got just incredible clarity already. I was going to use gelatin, but it was clearing up so well in the tank. I couldn't do it. And if you want to go and check out our Patreon, you'll see the behind the scenes there where I made the decision not to. But the big thing is it's just got that classic Mexican lager taste. It's slightly sweet with that kind of corn factor coming through. It's still dry because we've let this thing dry up a bit, so it's a refreshing, crisp summer beer. It only comes in at 4.9%, but most importantly, does this beat the big commercial counterparts like your Coronas, your Sols, your Modelos? Well, sorry guys, to get the answer to that one, you're gonna have to wait 2 weeks. Next week, we are gonna brew a Japanese rice lager to see if that can beat its commercial counterparts. And then we're gonna taste the two against each other to see which is the better beer, the Japanese rice lager or the Mexican cerveza, and do they beat their commercial counterparts? So thanks for sticking around. We'll catch you guys next time. And as always, happy brewing.